So I just wanted to inform you if you guys have questions. It's an Ask Me Anything. I'll be doing some demonstrations, but in the end, I'd love for you to ask your questions about what I did and other questions that you might have. So there's a Q&A button. If you go to the top of your page, there should be some dots, a dot icon beside a question mark or so. And if you press on that, you should find a Q&A. Click on that and you're able to ask me questions and I will address them as I can. And if you can't have this feature or find a question later after the show, just email me at alexis@ediblealchemy.co and it should all be possible to talk with me then. So I'm going to share with you what I'll talk about today. So we're going to talk more about the probiotic benefits. That's always our topic at hand. And we'll be talking about do-it-yourself vegetable fermentation and why it is important to do your own with your own hands, maybe better than buying it in the store. There's lots of reasons, and we'll talk about some of those. And we'll be going through the vegetable ferment basics. So what kind of supplies you need, from vegetables to vessels or salts, and water. The water is very important. And I'll be doing a demonstration with using vegetables that we're going to squeeze, or I will squeeze with my hands to get brine, a natural liquid from the vegetables, and ones that you can't. So for example, carrots or beans, these are vegetables that, yeah, you can squeeze them a lot with your hands, but there's not a lot of liquid that will come out of them, and how we can go about creating a brine or a liquid for those ones. And I'll be giving some tricks and tips, maybe how you want to keep your vegetables more crunchy, or some extra things you can add in there to make them extra tasty, and things that I've experienced, such as using hops. So hops, like the one you make for beer, I sometimes add that in there. So I'll talk about that, and then I'll get to your questions. And yeah, lovely for you to join me. Now, I'll get you up here. Entrance music. Welcome. It's me, live Alexis, at the Edible Alchemy headquarters. So why probiotics? We've talked about vegetable fermentation a little bit in other webinars, in my other webinar, my one, but today is going to be a bit more specific on the yeasts on the skins of vegetables and how these come into play with fermentation in general. So probiotics are basically good bacteria. We need these bacteria in our gut. In every one of our guts, we have 1 to 3 pounds, which is about, half a kilo to 1.5 kilos of bacteria in our gut, basically, which can sound scary, but we have bacteria on our skin. It's flying around. There's yeast in the air, and we have it in us. In our mouths, we have a different bacteria than we do in our gut, than we do on our skin. And so these are things, little creatures, little microbes that we have to get used to and actually become familiar with. And we need them for our health. We need them to survive. So that's one reason. Another reason is that fermenting food, having these good bacteria, actually enhances the nutrient availability in the vegetables. So basically, if you have a very difficult vegetable to digest, such as kale, this is a hard leafy green, after fermenting that kale leaf, you can actually absorb a lot more of those nutrients. Maybe I've said this before about the cow, how a cow has 4 stomachs, 4 chambers, and for the cow to digest grass, which we as humans can't, it goes through a fermentation process in each one of those stomachs. So it's breaking it down, fermenting during those processes, and then the cow is able to absorb all of those nutrients in the grass. We as humans, we're having also a fermentation process within our digestive system, but it doesn't go so long. So in the end, grass is unfortunately not very nutritious for us. So by fermenting some vegetables, you're actually able to get a lot more nutrients out of them than you do when they're raw, which is really cool, especially if you're living in a place where you might have less nutrients in your diet, or you need more nutrients, such as vitamin C. When you ferment vegetables, the vitamin C that exists from that state is actually lengthened, and the lifeline is extreme. It's a lot longer than how it would be after you just cut it. So basically, after you take a vegetable, maybe you pick an apple off the tree, that vitamin C level is actually going to be dropping over time until it's compost and it doesn't exist anymore. But when you're fermenting food, the vitamin C content is lengthened. Also, more nutrients are available, such as your vitamin Bs and niacin, all of these things. So that's great. That's a benefit. And our bodies are more able to absorb these things now that the cell walls are broken down. So let's check here. More about vegetable fermentation. A little card. Sometimes when we're fermenting vegetables, we're wondering, like, it's quite dry, there's nothing really happening here. How do you get water out of it? We're going to be pressing it and squeezing it to get the juices out. Often cabbage is actually really heavy, and it's because there's a lot of water in there. And so if we squeeze them, we can actually get that water out. Some questions people have often are about salt. Why do we use salt? Can I use no salt? If you use no salt, best to do it in the winter because there's less bacteria kind of floating around in the air when it's really, really hot. And the cold sort of slows down that fermentation process. And when you have salt, it's a preservation. But we'll talk more about salt in a little bit. Let's see. So vessels, let's talk about equipment. Actually, that's a really great point. So for equipment, you basically need just a jar. I have a jar here. I use glass often. Plastic I use rarely because often you need to have a food safe plastic. And if it's not food safe, of course, then it's not safe for making food. But if you have plastic, sometimes there's scratches or it's becoming an acidic environment that actually it could be harmful to your health. It would also change the flavor of your ferment. So I prefer glass. Metal is a not no-no because often because it's becoming acidic environment, you're actually going to be corroding that metal, and then again it's leaching into your vegetables, which you're eating yourself. So if you're using metal, use stainless steel. That's the best food safe, ferment safe vessel. Porcelain is great. Ceramics are great. Often the Germans have a ceramic vessel with a moat around it, and basically water can sit in that moat and you can put your lid into that moat so all of the air can escape and no air can get in. So basically it's creating its own vacuum, its own airlock. If you're really scared about mold and stuff like that, it's best to get an airlock. It's basically fastens onto the top of a jar or a lid, or it comes as a lid itself. And again, it's the process. It looks like the same thing you would use for wine, where bubbles can escape and the carbonation can get out, but no air can get in. And so basically any foreign articles or particles that are floating around won't get into your kraut. I guess I play it the more dangerous way often and don't use any of these special airlocks, and I just use the safety of a clean jar. You do not need to sanitize these things, such as wine, when you're making wine or beer, and really sanitize them. Just really hot soapy water is important. Actually, just having a clean environment in general is important. We will be using our hands. We will be using the yeast in the air to create the specific ferment specific to where you are. But you don't need to sanitize everything because we're going to be playing with these good bacteria that already exist. So again, we're living in this antibacterial world, and we need to sort of become friends with it and to realize how important it is. Basically, on the skin of every vegetable, there is some natural yeasts that are present. So on this skin, there's natural yeasts. And when I'm going to be sort of tearing this apart, cutting it up and crushing it, the sugars that are inside there are able to get at the yeasts, or the yeasts are able to get at the sugars, more or less. Yeast eats sugar. So for another example, the grapes you see in the store, often they have a little bit of white, chalky skin, and we often think that that is pesticides, or they're dirty, or they're old, or they're dusty. But most of the time, that's actually a yeast on the skin of the grape. And after you pick the grapes, there are more yeasts that sort of surround it because they're coming and they're wanting that fruit inside. that sugary part. So if you crush grapes, like the people who are stomping on the grapes, now that yeast can get at the sugars inside the grape, and that's how wine is produced. So just with the sauerkraut, with cabbage, I can sort of get those sugars in the insides available to the yeasts to eat them, and water and liquid is the process to do that. So that's one thing we'll be playing with. And another thing you'll need is just basically a bowl to crush all of your things, your vegetables. You can ferment everything, every vegetable that you can imagine. I thought that I wouldn't ferment potatoes, but I read, yes, you can. I thought that you wouldn't ferment lettuce, but you can. It's a shorter fermentation process because the skins or the leaves of lettuce is very thin, and so it could go mushy faster than like kohlrabi would or faster than carrots would. But they're all possible. Everything is possible to ferment, which is a great part. You will need salt. I have here really nice sea salt. That's important. Salt keeps your vegetables crispy. It also pulls the water out of the vegetables. It's a preservation technique in itself, and gives great taste. So it also extends the vitamins and nutrients that are in the vegetables. So for people who are on lower salt diets, you can do no salt. But again, like I said earlier, I would recommend it in cooler temperatures. Maybe ferment your kraut in the fridge. Maybe do it during winter. Or there's just more chance for bad bacteria to get in your kraut when there's no salt. So I would just be careful. If you're doing no salt, maybe use an airlock for this one. And when I say be careful, it means that there might be some mold that develops. And the mold that develops is often a white yeast on top, and it's totally benign. It's called cam yeast. This can be just simply scraped off, and you can salvage the vegetables underneath. But people who are squirmish, again, the airlock is a great tool to use. So what else can you use? So I have here, what I'll be showing you, some hops. This is basically like the flour that you would use for beer. This is my extra tip that you can use. You don't have to have it, but there's extra yeasts on there that are nice to have. Some typical spices that people put in a sauerkraut is like caraway seeds. I have just the seeds. You can crush them if you want. Or you can leave them whole. I'll be leaving mine whole, and as the fermentation process happens, those seeds, they become softer and you can digest them also, but also the flavor goes into the entire kraut. I have some dill seeds also. Fresh is best. Unfortunately, the season is almost over. And I have juniper berries, which are really great. This is a very typical thing to have in a sauerkraut. And you can use crushed peppercorns, or you could use celery seeds. Basically, any spices that you think might taste good, it's going to really infuse into your sauerkraut. Sharper things like onions or garlic will also not have as strong of a taste after the fermentation process, but all of the vegetables will have, you know, a hint of garlic or a hint of onion, which I actually really like. I like that extra sharp flavor in the entire kraut. And then they're also probiotic. So, and I'll talk about after how you can keep them extra crunchy with tannins. So tannins, if you're thinking about what that might taste like, think about sucking on a black tea bag. That's like pure tannin in there. So we don't want to add too much tannin to our vegetables or to our krauts, but some is good to have. So let's start cutting, and I will show you what I'm doing with one kraut first. So let's show the camera here. All right, so I have this great cabbage. It was a massive cabbage, so I only gave you a piece of it. I have some carrots, an apple, some leek, and here I have some beans. So for things like, I'm going to make 2 different sauerkrauts, or 2 different krauts in general. The cabbage I'm able to get water out of, so I'm able to squeeze this to make my own brine. A brine is like a salty water. things like beans and this leek and this cabbage, these carrots, I won't be able to squeeze them out, and so I'm going to make my own brine. So we can start with the cabbage. And you can cut basically any size you would like. For example, I'm going to cut it all of this size. If I have bigger chunks and little chunks, then it's not going to ferment at the same rate. So it's important to keep your vegetables all the same size. If I want to add carrots in here, then I would try and cut the carrots the same size. Everything is fermenting at its own rate. And so I keep the density of a vegetable and the thinness or the thickness of it, try to keep it all the same. It depends. Once I made a carrot ferment, and I cut it into really, like I shaved it basically, shredded it, and I cut it into coins and put it all into one ferment. The unfortunate thing was the shredded bits fermented really quickly because there's a lot of surface area, and the coined bits didn't ferment fast enough. So once the shredded bits were ready, the coined ones weren't, and once the coined ones were fermented and ready, the shredded ones were mush, and it didn't taste right. So I encourage you to cut them all the same size. Surface area is important. Now, what I do before I forget is I'm going to take one of these bigger leaves from the cabbage, and I'm going to use this as the top, sort of as a cap for my ferment. So it's important to have something to weigh it down. We'll talk about that. To weigh your vegetables down underneath the water is very important. Once your vegetables are on top of the water, if they're in the air, then it becomes compost. Okay, so great, we start with this. Gotta maybe move this up. Interactive. I hope you're all doing this at home right now with me. All right, so I got this cabbage going. This is going to be super basic kraut. I also want to add apples because it makes it sweeter. Let's do some apple. So the magic of apples, yes, it gives it sweetness, but also because of all that sugar in there, they're going to it's going to ferment quickly. Sugar means the yeasts are more active. So we have to watch it. There will be lots of bubbles. The first 3 days are the most important. And all of these are clean, but I don't need to take off the skins. The skins is actually where all the yeasts are and all the goodies are. And it gives it color also. Better be careful, I'm on camera here. All right. Now I will use my mussels and some salt. So approximately for, let's say, 1 jar, like a half-liter jar or so, you can add 1 to 3 tablespoons of salt. I have some salt, sprinkle it in there. As you see, I'm not perfectly measuring. I stand here. But the best thing to do is to taste it. I always encourage you to taste it. So I hope I get to this point. This is really great when you're when you're angry or have any aggression. It's a really great way to get all of that out. And you'll notice that all of that cabbage is going to get smaller and wetter because I'm squeezing those juices out, and the salt is also helping. So if you have a lot of patience, then you can get a lot of juice out. I want to get it to the point where I can show you that there's lots of moisture happening. And it's getting a lot smaller. And when we put it in the jar, we're going to really pound it down because we want it to be covered with its own juice. If I don't get it that juicy, I'll add water. Now, the important thing about water, I'll say it now and I'll probably say it again and I'll probably say it in every single webinar, is that dechlorinated water is really important. If you're living in a country where I'm from, in Canada, the water is really chlorinated. And if it's chlorinated, then it's going to kill all of the good bacteria that exist. That's what its job is for. And so if you let the water sit for 24 hours after you take it out of the tap, that's a way to evaporate the chlorine. Or if you boil it, then let it cool. Again, extreme heat, like freshly boiled water on your sauerkraut, again, will cook away the good bacteria. So here I go. I don't know, can you see there's some drips? Yeah, that's a good sign. And you can keep going, and I could probably get a lot of juice out of this. But for time's sake, now, actually, I want to add some hops, which is these little leaves that I was showing you earlier. Right there. So I'll just sprinkle some on. They actually smell kind of yeasty, beery. I really like the taste. They're dry. So just add a little sprinkle. And I will add some caraway seeds, again, to taste. So just for fun, just for flavor. And now this natural juice that I have made will naturally ferment my vegetables. It will, in some days, be bubbling and fermenting itself. However, if you want to give yourself a kickstart and you already have made vegetable fermentation before and you have some extra krauts, then you can add the juice of a previous sauerkraut to this one, and just a bit, maybe 2-3 tablespoons, and it will help inoculate this kraut. It will give it like 100% kickstart and say, hey, we already have some yeast and probiotics present. Go for it. Here's some fresh vegetables, some fresh sugars for you to eat. All right. Cool. So unfortunately, I guesstimated wrong, and I don't have a full jar. But what I can do with that, it's best to have a full jar to have minimal air. You can see that I already have like juice covering my hand. That's good. That's a good sign. So with my cap that I had saved, this is going to be the sacrificial leaf. And I'll put it down. It's going to sort of cover the vegetables there. So if this one gets brown, then it's at least protecting the vegetables that were brown underneath. And I would also like to cover it with about some inches of juice of water. This is dechlorinated water. And I just cover it some inches. Great. So looks good. Could have been a bit more colorful if I added some extra things. The salt content is good. I tasted it. It's up to my liking. Now, like I said, you can add some extra juices. This is a previous sauerkraut that I have, and I've been eating all of the vegetables, but I have all of this great juice left. And you can inoculate so many things with it. So I really like the taste of this one before, so I'll just add some of that to this one. Let's show you. Now that will give it a nice kickstart. And what I can do now is close it, clean off the edges. Any vegetables, any of these little side bits that are poking out, that will compost because it's oxidized by the air around it. So just clean it up, try to get them all down, and I can close it. And in some days, tomorrow and the next day and the next day, the 3 first days are very important, it will be bubbling and probably whistling and might run over, which often happens to me. So put a plate underneath. That's the best way to catch all of the juices, and to make sure that if you do a red beet ferment, that you don't have red beet juice running all over your table. That was my mistake. So I'm going to quickly show you if I don't have some juicy vegetables, that I have these beans here, and I'll just cut off the ends. I'll just prepare them, because when I eat a kraut, I don't want to have to prepare again my food. I just want to grab them out of the jar and eat them. So I'll just cut off these little ends. And these ones won't get any juices out of them. If I squeeze them, they might get a little bit, but it's just a hassle. So I'm going to make a brine, basically. And remember, you can ask me questions. You can start asking them now. And when it's actually question time, I'll get back to you. It's that thing at the top of your page that has a question mark beside it. And then beside it, there's the little dots, and you can do the Q&A and start asking me. And I'll address you when the time comes. All right. Now I have these beans. That's great. Let's do some carrots. Why don't I do, I'm trying to think if I do coins or sticks. Sticks can be nice because it'll all fit into the jar properly. Whatever, give them the same, relatively the same sort of thickness as a bean is. If you think about it. Do this. So carrots and dill beans. What do you think? Sounds like it could be nice. Every ferment ends up being different, again, because of the environment you're in. There's different yeasts in the air. There's different yeasts on your vegetables, on your hands. And so no matter what, when you try to replicate the same ferment, it will always taste different. And for me, that's the magic of fermentation. All right. And I have a jar somewhere. It's a, here we go. Great. All right. So I have this jar. I actually already have it with water in it. I'll pour a little bit out. Don't need that much right now. And I'm going to make, best way, I did it a bit opposite. Let's try this just a second. Okay. I'll make a salt solution. So for this little jar, maybe about 1 teaspoon or so. And I'm going to give it a little swizzle. And it's warm water, so the salt should evaporate, or not evaporate, dissolve. It should dissolve all of it, but we'll do it for time's sake. See? So I'm basically making just a salt solution because I can't get all of the water out of these vegetables. So that will eventually all go out. Oh, these are big beans. Maybe I can break them or cut them in half. Let's cut them for time's sake. And it's really great. You can totally pack your vegetables as full as you can. That's the goal. You don't need any space. You want as many vegetables. You know, it's harvest time. We all harvested all those vegetables, and you want to make sure you can have them through the winter. That's also the great benefit of food preservation. This is a technique our forefathers used so that they could eat all these great nutrients in the winter, and more nutrients are present after fermenting. You're breaking down those cell walls, and your digestive system is really able to get at those nutrients from the vegetables. All right. Some people make pictures in their jars. I don't know if I'm that patient or artistic that way that I would want to do that, but also kind of fun. All right. And in this one, I'm going to, instead of, again, letting it natural ferment, because I'm sure lots of you have done that, you can do that, I'll show you another pointer. So what I have here is whey. Basically, I make my own yogurt or my own milk kefir at home. And when the curds and the whey separate, the milk is separating into curds and whey, I take that whey off. Now that whey is probiotic. Whey is spelled W-H-E-Y. And it's probiotic, and it's a really great whey. It's protein, and it's a great starter for ferments. Sally Fallon, in her book Nourishing Traditions, uses whey in almost every recipe to start a ferment, to make ketchup, to make sauerkrauts, to make soda pops. It's full of protein, and it's also probiotic. So all you need, and it's a little bit salty also naturally, so just give it a couple of tablespoons there. All right. So I have the salt, I have the vegetables packed to the top, preferably underneath. even what I could do here is add a cabbage leaf, a sacrificial leaf. If you don't have a leaf, or if you don't want to use a leaf, you could use a clean stone. You could use a smaller jar to push the vegetables down. You can use ceramic weights. It's really important to have the vegetables under that water. And if they're not, again, they'll be compost. So there we have 2 ferments. You can add that salty water brine on the top, over top of your vegetables, or you can add it like I did at the bottom. And now that the salt's at the bottom, maybe I want to give it a shake, something like that. And after, you can leave them out of the fridge for 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. It's up to you. It will be bubbling for the first 3 days. It's really, those are the most important. Maybe it will be slower if the temperature in your apartment is colder. It will go faster if the temperature is warmer. And I've left a ferment out for longer than 2 months, and then I put it in the fridge. So I encourage you, open it up. You know it's going to be bubbling. Maybe you have to push those vegetables down because they will be with the natural carbonation being pushed out. So push them back under, try them every day. And when you like the taste, put them in the fridge and the taste will continue to change. Again, a ferment, the fridge is not a fermentation stopper, it's a fermentation slowing device, like Sandor Katz calls it. And it's very true. So sometimes I don't like a ferment and I put it in the very back of the fridge, and 2 months I come back to it and I realize, wow, what a flavor. Maybe it's really spicy at first and 2 months later it's not as sharp. I've made a fermented mustard. It was great after 3 months. So that is that part. For tannins, to make your vegetables crunchy, if some of you must have pickles at this time of year, it's summer just ended, it feels like, and so there's lots of pickles present. If you want to keep them crispy, the trick is, because they're so watery inside, it's easy for them to break down and become mush. You need tannins. So I said a black tea bag. You can use black tea leaves, about 1 or 2 tablespoons, or half a teaspoon actually, to a ferment, and those tannins will be released and they will keep the vegetables crunchy. You could also use grape leaves, about 3 grape leaves for 1 gallon or a liter of pickles. You can use oak leaves, so a green oak leaf that might be present in your neighborhood or not. You can also use horseradish leaves if that might be in your kitchen, or kombucha. If some of you are familiar with kombucha and you're making it with the original black tea recipe, I have tried it using some ferments as a starter, just like I used the whey as a starter. I also have made the gingerbug last webinar. You could experiment and use that gingerbug as a starter, 1 or 2 tablespoons about. And yeah, so you can use kombucha sort of as a starter if you like. Yeah, so now there's lots to be addressed about vegetable fermentation in general, and this is just the basics here, but I'd love for you to ask some questions and I'll address them. So shoot your questions out and I'll answer them as we go. And I have lots more hidden information in my head. So here's one. All right, and I'm a little bit blind, so my face comes in the computer. So do smaller vegetable pieces ferment faster than bigger chunks? And if so, what would you guesstimate is the difference? So basically, if I have this bean and I put it full into my ferment, sort of like I did now, it will take longer because now it's the yeasts and the bacteria are taking a long time to get into it, to inoculate it. If you want to do smaller pieces, half, maybe quarters, maybe even smaller than that, it could be much faster. So there's a lot more surface area, there's a lot more sugars available, and so it could speed up. You know, if you like a certain taste, when it's like this, say for example this takes a week, maybe this would take half a week or so, like it'll half the time, basically, the smaller vegetables you have. So some places in Korea, they take a full cabbage, like a full head of cabbage, just put the spices on the entire cabbage and throw it in a giant vat of other cabbages and spices. And then next year, the kimchi is ready. Whereas for me, I want kimchi in a month or less. And so I'm cutting my cabbage a lot smaller, and so that it will go a lot slower. Like there's a lot of layers here that you have to get through. So depends how big the chunks you want or not. And any more questions? All right. How do I dechlorinate the water? So like I said, to dechlorinate the water, you can either let your water sit for 24 hours on the counter, or you can boil it. But remember, if you boil it, you have to let it cool. And how do you know if it's cool enough? For example, if this was boiled water at one point, the safest test, your skin has nerves in it, just like the microbes in your bacteria. And so I would put my finger in, and if you can hold it for 10 seconds and it's not burning you, then it's safe enough to use for your ferment, to use for your kombucha or whatever. That's the safe test. Or you can be a bit more strict about it and use a thermometer. Or you can just use natural spring water and just be safe that there's no chlorine in it. Let's see. Hi. Okay. See, you don't peel the carrots. Okay. So the carrots, I actually peeled them before, but you don't have to. Actually, I don't often peel my carrots. I usually clean them really well and leave the skins on. Depends what kind of taste. Again, if they're very muddy, if you get them straight out of the garden, your kraut will taste a bit groundy, a bit earthy. And that's maybe a taste you want, but if you want them really clean, you can really scrub them, or you can peel them. I pre-peeled mine. I'm a big advocate of food saving, and so I had some carrots that actually had some black bits on it, and of course I don't want the color nor the taste in my kraut, and so I peeled it off. And you can use a lot of the vegetables in your fridge that have wrinkles or starting to go bad. It's a great time to use them for fermentation because the cell walls are starting to break down. There's a lot of yeasts present, so use them. Again, if there's moldy bits, like on my apple, I had a bruised bit that got punctured in my bag. I'm not going to use that just for the taste, but you can use vegetables that are going bad. Thanks for loving my webinar. Okay, let's try. Are there certain veggies that don't mix well? Okay, and ferment at the same speed. And do all ferment at the same speed? Oh no, okay. Veggies that ferment at the same speed. So veggies don't ferment all at the same speed. This is a good question because vegetables with more sugar will ferment faster. For example, red beet. If you want to do red beet in a vegetable ferment, I had done one recently in something similar to the one we did today. But because there's so many sugars in a beet, you eat it raw and it's sweet. I cut them into big chunks. And that red beet turned my entire white kraut pink, like a fuchsia. It was very beautiful. And it was helping the ferment process with those sugars. So when you're doing beets, I don't shred it often because there's too many surface areas present, which means too much sugar, which means explosive. Very sweet vegetables will actually lead to more of a foaming on top. Don't worry about it. That's totally normal. That's just part of the fermentation process. Things like cabbage, sometimes there's foam, but really sweet vegetables, you will get a foam coming on top, and you can just kind of scoop it away. If you need to, add a little bit more water, and again, press the vegetables down. And for certain veggies that mix or not, that's totally up to your taste. I'm trying to think. Carrot and kohlrabi go good together. I can think only of these really great combinations that go together. Trying to think of one that doesn't go together. But yeah, like I showed you how apple can go in there also. In certain parts of the world, they add mangoes and other fruits to their ferments. You can make chutneys, so making sort of a sweet and savory. Just experiment. I totally encourage you, and always let me know your results. That's the fun part of fermenting things, is sharing your results and maybe your own secret recipes or findings. Here I have another question. Can you add additional flavoring after the main fermentation has taken place? So for example, adding honey to a relish to make it a bit more sweet, or ground cayenne pepper to make it a bit more spicy. Yeah, like one time I had a ferment that I didn't have enough salt. So that's a bit hard to add more salt, but it's definitely possible. What you can do is, so for example, you have all of this brine, all of this liquid in there. You can pour this off. If you taste it after a couple of days and say, it's not salty enough, I would pour that brine off and make a new one with the salt that I have and some water, make a very salty solution and pour it over top. Now it's also going to be a different ferment if you had done that in the very beginning, because it's fermenting at a different rate again. But it still will help give your vegetables some more salt, and you can add other flavors to it. Again, it's going to be different than you started at the beginning, but it's possible. There are some processes that they do this anyways. They add salt and spices at different stages. So experiment, and maybe you find that you like adding hot chili peppers near the end, rather, to give it more spicy flavor. If you add them at the beginning, then your ferment won't be as spicy at the end. It sort of takes down that spice. And what else do we have here? Yeah, and you can definitely add these things to different products. Like I have my sauerkraut juice that I added, and you can really add that to many other things. The technical term when you put this juice into another sauerkraut is called backslopping. Not the nicest sounding word, but that's the technical term. Let's see. We have another. Is it possible to ferment salad greens? Yeah, it is possible. I would do the crunchiest parts. So things like lettuce you can do collard greens or kale. The very thin leafy ones are possible. You could do radish leaves, you could do beet leaves, kohlrabi leaves. These are really nice to be fermented because you're better able to get those nutrients again and break down those walls. But very thin leafy vegetables, actually, I would say maybe 2 or 3 days fermenting, and then you can already start consuming or put them in the fridge to keep them crunchy, because they will get soft quickly. So thinner vegetables, faster fermented. Let's see. What can add kraut to my kraut to make it really special, besides the ingredients that I already mentioned? So what else could be added? You could, let's see, there's lots of things that you could add to your kraut. So I said that you could add this. You can also do like a kombucha kraut. This is my whey. I have kombucha. Some people have used a kombucha SCOBY. This is a kombucha, many SCOBYs in there. And you can actually put a SCOBY on your kraut and it will have a more vinegary, fermented taste. Then you will just have to separate your SCOBY from your vegetables, which can be a hassle, and just gives it a different taste. So that's something really inventive, really fun. Instead of doing a kraut, you could also do like a vegetable kombucha. Next webinar, I'll also be talking about kombucha and how to make it and some really fun inventions with that. So stick around, stay tuned. So please feel free to ask more questions. I'll give you a couple more minutes, and I can check out what else I can ask you here or what I can tell you. Yeah, so ask me some questions. This is a live webinar, so it's all up to you guys at this point. And some things that really influence your sauerkraut would be the temperature, again, the surface area of your vegetables, things like that. So yeah, I'll give you a couple more minutes. And if you like this webinar and you want to see more, sign up, and next week we'll have one about kombucha. There will be some more webinars coming up in the future. Sign up for the email. Go to ediblealchemy.co. Everything's coming out new and exciting. So please feel free to check it out. All right. So that looks like that's it for the vegetable fermentation workshop. And please, if you have any more questions later and you think about them, or if you're trying your kraut and you have some complications or problems or some strange yeasts that are growing, let me know about them. Take a picture, send it to me if you're scared. And I'll be sure to answer any questions that you have about that. And there's also a Facebook group that you can join. It's very new. It's called Edible Alchemy Group. So just join Edible Alchemy. I'm on there. I'll answer your questions there. We can have discussions with other people about your ferments, your first times, your second times, your 1 million times ferments, and we can have a more informational group there. So check that out. Thanks for joining me, and hope to see you again. Again, this is the second webinar, and I hope to see you there for the third. Ciao.